First topic I'm going to talk about is migration. We know people have spent time investing in V1 extensions, and we want to make sure that your investments there are not lost going forward. We also have investments in V1 internally, and again, we want to keep those going forward as easily as possible. So when we talk about migration, we are talking about moving specifically a V1 extension to a V2 extension. And what I'm going to talk about here is mostly the code changes, but I will also talk briefly about the upgrade as well. So a couple of things you need to know as you start this process. You'll need to change the version of the V2 extension to be newer than the version of the V1 extension. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. The migration of data occurs as part of the upgrade process. So there's not something separate you have to write. It's going to be in that same model. And the way we'll do that is through the V1 nav app functions. Those are still in place. Those still work for the archive data that's there. And I'll show an example of that here a little bit later on. So the first part of this to know about is the txt #2 al.exe conversion tool. What this will do is convert the source code from your V1 extension to the newer format. And there's basically two steps you need to know for this. The first one is, as painful as that V1 process was of making sure you have your baseline, exporting the code, making changes, export code, do the deltas, unfortunately you're going to need to do that one more time. And the difference here is that a new command has been added to FinSQL, the export to new syntax, and that brings in additional data that we needed for doing the conversion that wasn't in the initial source format that we used with extensions. So you do want to make sure that you export your code this way. Don't go into C-side and do an export, that'll be missing stuff. Don't do the normal export you can do from the command line. Make sure you're using the export new syntax command. And the second one is when you have those files exported and you've done your diff through the AMU tools, then you can go ahead and run the text to AL tool. And the information you need to provide, there's a couple extra parameters you can't provide, but this is the basics that are required, is the source, where your deltas were created, your new objects were created at, the target, where you want the files to go. If they happen to be the same location, you can use the rename so to avoid file collisions and overwrites. And the extension start ID. And what you may be thinking now is, why do I need to provide an ID? My objects all have IDs. Well, remember that we're taking the deltas you made in pages and tables. So if you modify the customer table, modify the customer card, we're now converting those as extension objects. And those didn't have IDs, they didn't exist before. So we need to know where in your license range you would like these IDs to start numbering at. And now I'll go through and do some default numbering. Also included on the slide, the link to where to find documentation about this tool. And then the last note about this tool that I have is there's some cleanup you probably want to do afterwards. And you may not have to do any of this, you may not need to be aware, but it's good to be aware of just in case any of these scenarios get to your code. One of them is that we don't support .NET code in V2 extensions. So if you were using .NET code in your V1, you'll have to go through and manually clean up .NET to be some of the newer APIs or other mechanisms, of which I'll show a little bit later. The second one is you're going to want to validate all the IDs. If your range should be the same, the numbering should work okay, but it's good just to do a sanity check with IDs to make sure that those are all there. And also, we require names on some places that we didn't require in the C side. So we auto-generate those names, and that means they're not always necessarily the names that make sense or the best names. You might want to go through and rename some of those objects as well. So a couple other things to note is that what was the manifest file in your V1 extension is now the app.json file, if you haven't seen this already. And the most important point here is that you want to make sure that the app ID that was in your manifest matches the app ID that's in your app.json. If they do not match, the platform believes them to be two completely different extensions, and you won't be able to access the data that was stored with version 1 of your extension. It will be created as a brand new item. So in order to make sure that you can migrate that data forward, make sure that the app IDs match. And I talked about the version 2, or the version of your V2 extension needs to be greater than the V1 extension, and that's what Chris talked about. If the version is not greater, if they're the same, we run the install code instead of the upgrade code. So you want to make sure that since we're moving the data in the upgrade code, that the version is new so that the upgrade code gets invoked. I talked about the nav app functions for upgrading the data, and some of these work if you do the restore archive data one in particular, those work based on matching the IDs of the tables. So in that case, you will want to make sure that the table IDs still match going forward. Otherwise, you can still use the archive record graph, but you have to write all the code manually to move that data forward. So let's say we've written all our upgrade code, we've got everything written. How do I actually migrate a customer's data going forward? So this is going to very closely match the version 1 upgrade process, because version 1 hasn't changed, so we still need to uninstall the version 1 extension. That will move the data to the archive table. Then we go through the publish and sync of our V2 extension, like Chris talked about. And then we call invoke start nav app data upgrade. And that's going to invoke the upgrade code for your extension if a V1 was present in that tenant previously. And as a short example of what some of that upgrade code might look like, here's an example of an upgrade code unit. We're using the on upgrade per company trigger. I'll be talking more about tomorrow. But basically we're going through, we're calling the get archive version, checking what that's equal to, and using some of those functions where we can restore the archive data, we can delete the data if it's not something we want to carry forward, or we can get the archive record graph and then process that to do any manual logic we have to do going forward. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the language features, some of them that we've added with the V2 extensions. And if you were in Espen's session yesterday, he's talked about these, so if you're there, you can tune out, check your emails, good time to do that. If you haven't seen them though, I'm going to go through them briefly. I'm not demoing anything with these. I have very short snippets, but they're on the slides, so when you get the deck, you don't have to worry about what were the demos. So the first thing I want to talk about is I talked about .NET is not supported in V2 extensions. So we always get the question, I use a lot of .NET, what do I do? You just killed my app, I can never use this. So we got feedback from partners about, we get this feedback, which is very common, what are you doing in .NET? And 90% of the people we talked to was this list. These were the most common things that people were doing. And there will probably be others. Continue to give us that feedback about what were you using. We want that feedback. That's where this list came from. So when we look at what we do next, we look to you for guidance. It doesn't make sense for us to go implement all of .NET, so we can do things that are better use of our time to help you out. So, but this is the things we try to cover. I'll go through each of these real quick. So with HTTP and JSON, I lump these together because they're used very often in tandem. But the things I wanted to show here are, I've created the HTTP client. That's the general place where you'll start working with the web calls. And here I call them get, passing the URL I want to go to, and get the response object back. And then here I can start reading the stream off the response, read a JSON object from that, and then start doing operations on that to read data, modify the data, maybe send it back to another service to translate data back and forth that way. So again, this example was all the error checking. It's not robust, but I want to get the basics out here so at least you have a place to start. The next one I want to talk about is XML. So here I'm doing some very brief stuff. We're using the XML document as our place to start. And I'm creating a new document. I'm creating a new element, in this case conference. I'm giving it an attribute called name, and I'm setting the value to directions. And then I'm adding the element to the document. Again, then you can pass this around, you can call back to HTTP, you can do more modification on it. But this is a good place to get started. Very simple. The next one I want to talk about is text builder. If you're familiar with string builder.NET, this would be similar. But basically, you can do the append line, the append, convert the result to text, and store in an object. List, again, so these are limited to simple types, as what they work on now. So here I'm using a list of type integer. I can add elements to it. I can do a for each over it to iterate, and then process them that way. Dictionaries, similar to lists. Here again, these are limited to simple types, so I have a dictionary of integers as the keys and values. I can add a value, I can update it with a set. I can iterate over the keys in the dictionary and then use the get on the dictionary to retrieve the value for those. And this one gets to be a little different. So one of the other things .NET was used for was the client-side add-ins. And the only reason we had .NET therefore was to declare an interface. So we had .NET for the interface, we had a manifest file if you're familiar with the process, and then you had to take all your JavaScript, C# or CSS, package that up in a zip file. And now the way this is done is we have a top-level object that you can add to your code, being the control add-in. These stuff that was in the manifest becomes the properties on this object. And then down at the bottom, we declare the API for interacting with this. So I can have a procedure called JavaScript that I can invoke from AL that will send data to the client. I also have a callback that the JavaScript can invoke. It's an event, so it uses all the normal event properties, where then anybody can subscribe to it and handle the callback, and the JavaScript invokes that. The other benefit of this is, so not only the object, but the files I referenced in here, the scripts, the startup script, style sheet, so on, are all added directly to the project. So they can exist anywhere within your project that you want. And the compiler takes care of doing the packaging, getting those into the system, and knowing how to migrate or send those back and forth to the client. So you no longer have to go through that additional step of how do I assign the pieces, how do I package them all, how do I get that into my extension. That's all handled now with the new compiler. The next item I want to talk about is profiles and extensions. And there are a few things I want to talk about here. But this goes back to, now that we have a new compiler, we can start addressing some of the new needs. We've had on our plate for a while a request that people want to be able to add profiles in their extensions. They have scenarios where they want a new profile that links to a new role center page. They want to be able to assign users to that. And the way profiles were handled previously was that they existed in the application database for one, so they were shared across all tenants. So we've taken care of that aspect of it. But also creating the profiles themselves could be rather difficult. And the easiest way to go about doing that was to load up the role tailored client, do the profile modification there, and save out the XML files. And then if you needed to modify them, well, I know some people have tried to modify them by hand to varying degrees of success, but generally they re-import them, start modifying, and try to save them back out again. So now that we have the new compiler, as we've shown that we can add new objects, we can handle some of these other scenarios, but also because we have page extensions, when we start looking at what's in a profile, again, there's some default information that defines it, and then it's modifications to pages, which sound a lot like a page extension. And there's some things that we don't allow in profiles that are a page extension, but if we simplify that down, the moving of fields, the changing text on fields, showing and hiding are very similar. So I'll show here on the next page that declaring a profile is very easy. You declare the new profile object, you specify the 3 properties that are available, and the 3rd property on there is the list of customizations. So it's basically which pages do I want to modify. So now that I've got that, I can create a page customization, which should look a lot like a page extension. In terms of it allows the layout, I can modify things, we can add actions, we can change the visible, move stuff around, stuff like that. The big difference here between this and the page extension, again, is that you're not allowed to add code, so there's no reason to add variables, can't have triggers here, because these are strictly for modifying the look of the page. The other thing that once we had this model that it allowed us to do was we could go back to the work we were doing with the in-client designer, where we were missing the ability to personalize the web client up to this point, and say, hey, we have this great tool that we can use for developing extensions, which are creating the page extension objects. Well, now we have page customization, which is almost the same object. So with a little bit of modification, we can use all the investment we made in the compiler, these new types, and the designer, and all of a sudden enable page or personalization of the web client really quite quick, which was something that had been in our backlog for a long time, but because of the investment, it never really got started to the degree we wanted it to. So now we've got profiles, we've enabled personalization of the designer, and you can see where these things just start to roll together once we get going, where, hey, we can take this piece, oh, that applies to multiple scenarios, and we can keep moving those forward. The last piece I want to talk about today is embed apps. And I don't know if people heard us talk about embed apps in the past or solutions, but it goes back to that, the where Chris started at, where we had the connect apps, people connecting through the web APIs to our application. The add-on apps that we talked about here, which are largely used for horizontal add-ons. How do I do credit card processing? How do I do a bolt-on on top? And then embed apps, how do I really deeply modify? How do I customize for that micro vertical that Marco was talking about this morning? And this is one that we've looked at, and at the outset, we say, oh, we haven't made a lot of progress on that. But I think as we've really started to look at what we've done and our thoughts around this, we've made more progress than we think. And so I want to try to get people to kind of change a little bit of thinking around embed apps right now, first of all. So where we focus when we've talked about this in the past, and probably a little bit to our detriment, is the platform technology piece. That add-on apps are going to be a certain type of extension, that's that, as you know. And eventually embed apps will come up with what the deliverable is for those. But as we started looking at what's the difference between an add-on app and an embed app? And from a purely technology standpoint, there are a couple of scenarios that are very unique to embed apps. But when we started looking at, well, everything we did for add-on apps is needed by embed apps. Some of the stuff that we had in the embed apps bucket, the profiles, well, isn't that useful for add-on apps as well? Let's put that in there. And the more we started working through these scenarios, the more these two buckets started to overlap. And it's become clear to us that there's very few cases where we want to do something different for embed apps that's not available for add-on apps. So that's why I didn't put a list on here of what's going to be. It's going to be an extension at the end of the day. And depending on your micro vertical, you might not need to modify the base application to a large degree. You may have everything you need already to go ahead and start building an embed app. And we know there are some scenarios yet that aren't covered. Please give us feedback as to what you're trying to do, what you need to do, what's still needed that's not available. That's what we're going to use. That feedback is what we're going to use to drive what we work on going forward. But also remember, a lot of this is in place, and we need to start talking about we have extensions. Extensions is the technology part of that, so that's the upper right of this. The second piece, which I think Marco did a great job of talking to this morning, and I probably won't do as well, but I'll give it my best, is your IP. You know the domain. You know what your customers need. That's what you're building with this platform component. And that's stuff that ultimately lies with you to be able to deliver. We want to give you the platform to build on, and if we're missing stuff, please let us know. But ultimately, you know what it is that needs to be built. And that's the part that customers really care about. The next thing is partner tools. As we go through this process, we've got AppSource already for making stuff available. But with some of these embed apps, we know, and these micro verticals, we know that you need a more direct line of communication to the customer. You need more control sometimes over what that customer is able to do. And those are scenarios that we're starting to build up now that will give you more control over what the customer is able to do. Are they allowed to install all the extensions? Do they need a subset of them? What can you go in and modify for that customer? How can you be in there proactively seeing what's happening with that customer? Maybe through a subset of that 40 terabytes of telemetry that we have. Maybe through other tools that allow you to see what's happening. Maybe the ability to run test upgrades before they happen, so that when we get to our upgrade cadence, there's no surprises there. You know that when that goes through, that's going to be ready. And the last part is the marketing of it. And we know we have AppSource available for this right now, but as Marco talked about too, some of this is going to have to come from you guys to generate leads through those other channels as well. AppSource is a good tool, but it's probably not the only tool. It's not the only place people want to be to find information, especially when they're looking for something very specific to their market or locale. They're going to go on these search engines, and it would be nice if they could find you there as well. So I know there's also, I'm not the best person to talk about marketing, but I know there's discussions going on back and forth between Microsoft and partners about how this becomes more available. So hopefully this, basically, again, what I'm trying to set here is that we made the mistake of saying at some point there will be a separate artifact for embed apps. And again, as we looked at that, we said, the artifact, the very technical, that upper right corner, is what we have today. So if you're missing functionality, if you need new app refactoring to enable scenarios, please let us know. But don't wait for the magic silver bullet to come. That's not coming down the line. We're delivering a lot of what is needed, we believe, for this already. So finally, I'm going to recap, because we've gone through a lot of stuff here. Some of it at a very high level, but we want to give an intro to what's happening. But when we talk about extensions 2.0, we're really talking about these 4 buckets. The changes in the platform that somehow impact the way you do stuff, give benefits to these other tools down the line. Some of them that just make things more stable, increase the productivity of processes. The new APIs we've been able to, I know there was a lot of concern when we took away .NET and we're not fully there in replacing all the scenarios. but we've delivered on a lot of those. We've delivered new APIs to help with the upgrade process. The new compiler that we've talked about, that's, again, it's an enabler for a lot of these scenarios. The technology of Seaside just didn't allow us to go in and do everything that we wanted to do, didn't cover all the scenarios we wanted to deliver for you so that you can deliver for your customers. And finally, the new developer tools, both the Visual Studio Code integration and the in-client designer, and other tools that we may continue to build down the line. So finally, what should you be doing when you leave here? Get ready for Extensions V2. I think it's clear that we made a large investment in this, that this is the way we're going forward, and it would be good for you to start to understand how to use these tools, to understand what's there and what's missing. Give us that feedback. So if you're starting from scratch, use V2. If you haven't submitted your app to AppSource yet, try to convert it to V2. See if that's possible. That'll have benefits for you and for us. If you already have an app, convert it to V2. Let's get that progress going right away. So how do you get started with this? The AKA-MS Nav Developer Preview link, that will take you out to Azure, where you can always create the latest developer VM that we've created. That's currently the September build. Some of the stuff we showed today is not available until the October build. We're giving you the very latest information we have, basically. And if you have problems, the github.com/Microsoft/AL is a good location to go and interact with the developers directly. Espen in the audience, his team has done a good job of setting that up, maintaining it, and multiple teams are out there checking for information, getting good feedback from partners, and hopefully giving good feedback back. I talked to a partner on Sunday who said it was amazing. He loves it. He said he was used to the model of show up at Directions, see what's new, spend the year using it, show up at Directions next year, tell Microsoft it's wrong, show up at Directions the next year and hope it's fixed. And now he said he can go out there, he can get the latest monthly preview, he can try it out, he can post up there, he can get feedback, and the next month when the build comes out, it's got the fixes in that he wanted. He was giddy over how well this was working for him, how fast he could get stuff turned around. And this is really the model we want to go to, because it's your scenarios that we're trying to solve. You are our customers. So the only last thing I have is there are a lot of sessions going on with extensions. This is a few of them. But check through the guide. The two in red that are highlighted are, the first one is the session that Chris was talking about earlier. We'll be going into more depth on upgrade for extensions specifically. And then the workshop that we will have related to this content as well. We're going to get a picture of that that wants it. Brian, you don't need a picture, so you're good. I'm not waiting for you. Okay. You ready? Okay. And the obligatory give us feedback slide. With the donations that are being made, I strongly encourage you to do that this year. Let's help reach that goal. And then finally, we have 15 minutes for questions. Wow. Nobody has any questions? Oh, okay, we're there.
So if you're using document variables, translate that?
The question was, if you're using .NET variables, do you need to translate them? Yes. There is no support built into the new compiler for .NET yet, directly at this point.
So your companion tables are basically join tables. You can join customer to a series of extension companion tables.
Correct.
Any notion on being able to do a union? So if we want to put some data in a ledger table, which is kind of hard to do in the basic.
Yep.
So, is there any way we could put our data in a table that can then be unioned into an existing ledger table?
Okay. So the question was, in addition to companion tables, is there the possibility for a union table? That's not something we've considered yet. So I think I would have to take a look at that one. We'd have to look at the scenario specifically, and I'm not going to say it's not possible. It's just not something we've considered yet. So that's good feedback. So.
With the addition of the page extension model, is there a possibility of conflict in the presentation?
Yeah, there's so the question was, is there the possibility of conflicts from two-page extensions on the same page?
Well, yeah, and I was going to say the answer is, yes, they can conflict, but what we've done is just adopt a conflict resolution strategy. So it's not like there's going to be a fundamental break, but of course there is going to be differences in what you expect, right? You try to move field, somebody tries to move field, somebody has to win. Since we're dealing with UI changes, yes, that creates unexpected results, but we didn't feel it was appropriate to say just flat out, oh, this can't happen, right? Blow up the process. So unfortunately, there isn't a perfect answer to that problem, and there wasn't a perfect answer in D1. We had the same problem. We dealt with doing the same thing. So conflict resolution seems to be the best way to deal with an unfortunate situation.
I think one step beyond that, though, is now that we're getting personalization within the web client, the user has an opportunity to go fix it if they don't like what they see. So, which was something we were missing before in the web client specifically.
I was wondering if you're going to present the fact that there's a conflict to the user, they should know that they maybe want to rewrite.
It's been a topic we discussed was, how do you surface that feedback? And it's not something we've gotten to yet.
Well, I think we have. I think what we looked at was what's the best experience for the user, and how much does the user know that something's going wrong, and how much do they care that something's going wrong? And it probably depends some on what the scenario is and what the user's expectation is. So if a field ends up in a different location, but they didn't know where it was supposed to be to begin with, and it's on the page, they know it's on the page and they can move it if they want. I think the scenario that might be worth investigating is if one of those two is to show a field and the other one's to hide it, or one's to move it, one's to hide it, then they might not know the field's there, which could be a problem.
Well, I think there's also an avenue for considering different audiences, right? Your customer may not want to see that conflict, but you as a developer or partner putting things together may want to know, and so you say, oh, okay, I need to make sure that the apps I'm putting together are compatible. Here's all the incompatibilities. So, in my opinion, that's the kind of scenario where I can see that visible conflict becoming very useful.
Yep.
You keep mentioning that this is available on the web, but is this also available on the Windows client? Because I was led to believe earlier that it's all the same, and it's just the presentation is different.
Yeah. So the extensions V2 technology will work with the RTC client as well. The in-client designer is only available on the web client, but everything will work on-prem. So did that answer your?
I think so.
Okay. I think there was somebody.
Yeah, I don't mean to get too granular, but the .NET support, will that do things like base64 encoded strings, and regular expressions, and string splitting, and those kind of basic .NET functions, or are those still to come? Are they more just the .NET objects themselves?
I think those are largely to come. I know, Espen, in your session, you pointed out there's a Cal Open Library on GitHub. We didn't include details in this link, or this slide deck, but that's where we've accepted ideas and even contributions from folks on the outside. I think I've seen stuff out there like encryption and MD5 and different hashing and stuff. That sounds like largely what you're asking for. So the answer is it's not there right now, but this is the kind of feedback we need to know what to build, or if you want to contribute, there's the ability to do that too.
Yeah, and exactly the functions you named here are most likely something that we will include. I mean, everyone needs that.
Yeah.
So it's in the same bucket as the one showed up there.
So for everybody that didn't hear that, the answer was that the regex, base64 encoding, and string splitting are probably in our next bucket of .NET replace to come.
The issue of telemetry and conflicting or errors happening when extensions conflict raised the question of, is there a way for developers to get back that some of that data, whether it's, hey, someone tried to put these two apps together and they conflicted. I mean, I really wanted to get telemetry about errors that my clients are seeing. I mean, you guys are leveraging that yourself. Is there a way for us to get that? It may not be.
Yes. So the question was, what kind of information can we give the partners right now and going forward? And I'll answer the right now first, not much, nothing really. If we detect a hard issue, we'll get in touch with the people that develop the extensions and crashes. Yep, you'll get an email from us real quick. That's not ideally where we would like to be. So one of the things with telemetry is we look at, like we said, if there's 40 terabytes, we have to make sure that we give partners the information that pertains to their customers. We obviously don't want to start giving out other information. We also need to make sure that's sanitized so that we're not giving out personally identifiable information, which can make it a little bit harder for you once you finally get that telemetry, but those are things that we have to do to protect that information. And now also, I know it's very common in Europe right now, I don't know how common knowledge it is here, but there's new legislation called GDPR that regulates where all personal information is, and that has tightened everything we do down extensively. So now we also have to figure out how we work with the telemetry that we want to get you, it's useful for you to have, but how we do that while managing our requirements under GDPR as well and other laws. So
You're thinking about it now?
we want to get there. We know it's something that we have to give you information about what's happening. We just have to make sure that we are, number one, safe and sanitary in ourselves, and number two, because of the prescribed fines for GDPR, I don't know how many people are familiar with those, but they're rather large. We would rather not throw billions of dollars away because we screwed up and handed something out that we weren't supposed to.
I think on your embed app slide, you had that lower left one
Yes.
about the partner tools, and I think
Yep.
that falls into the bucket of managing, but
Exactly.
also being more effective at developing and putting together the combination of apps. Because you may not be the one that's developing all the apps, but you're the one who's delivering the solution, so you need that visibility to compatibility.
Yep. So the short answer is we don't have enough now. We're trying to do what we can to get more. It's a high priority on our list. So. Other questions? Yes.
Maybe it's too technical at the moment. Are there any limitations, quantity of fields to be added to tables, size of the total 8,000 bytes? It is now, for example.
So the question was, are there limits on the number of fields that can be added to a table? And this actually got better than V1 because we went to companion tables. So in V1, it was the record limit was the sum of all the fields,
Yep.
so the base table and anything that modified it. So you could have something that worked for you, and when you add 3 other extensions in, all of a sudden it stops working. Because we have the companion tables now, your data is segregated into its own SQL table, so you have your own size limit there.
So size limit is for my extension.
Yes, the amount
Still
of data
8,000?
you put in there, plus the primary key fields,
Uh-huh.
because that's our link back and forth.
And limit is leaving the same, 8,000 bytes.
Yeah, that's the SQL limit.
Yeah, there's still a hard SQL limit. And let me answer the question you didn't ask, which is about what other limits do I need to be concerned about? There are some new constraints around things like keys, as you might imagine, with companion tables, have field and separate physical tables. And we have to also think about the problem of a shared database with a base table and the noisy neighbor problem. Well, I'm adding indexes and it affects other people's performance. And so at the moment, we do have some scenarios that took a baby step back where cross-table keys are not supported, but we're keenly aware that there are cases that need to be able to index on base fields plus app fields, and we're thinking about ways to solve that aren't going to impact all the users.
So right now, your keys can only use the primary key and your fields.
Yeah, so that's the one, the primary other piece you want to be aware is around keys, but to your point about field size and table size, that's actually gotten better.
Other questions?
I'm sorry, what was that size limit?
The SQL size limit is 8,000 bytes, roughly.
I think so.
So,
Absolutely.
What was the thing in the key? Can I change a primary key?
No, you definitely can't change a primary key. The comment I was making was that when you're dealing with keys in V2 extensions,